This episode is brought to you by Clickbait Headlines. I just made this new episode, and you won't believe what happens next. This is Hot Drop, where we bring you premier PUBG analysis and the spiciest drops. In this episode, I'm talking about the current state of PUBG and its community. I'm Daniel, your host, and let's get into it. Pack it in, folks. PUBG is dead. It had a good run. We can clearly see player counts completely stagnating, and the most recent update only had about 2 patch notes, so sad to say it, but this will be the last Hot Drop episode from me. I just don't see a future in this game anymore, now that we haven't had a new peak player count for the past 10 days. I can't bring myself to support a game that only had a measly 2.1 million players today. So just like everyone else, it's time to jump ship. In all seriousness, PUBG lately is still crushing all other games on Steam. Current peak players are 2,279,084, and we might finally be nearing a ceiling of sorts. I still think we might meet my not-so-bold prediction of 2.5 million by the end of the year. Oh, and here's an interesting stat. At one point this week, there were more PUBG current players than the sum of all of the other games on the top 100 Steam list combined. As always, big shout out to B-Hole for those incredible numbers, and this PUBG player update is dedicated to Trevor. A few episodes back, I was talking about the surge in player counts, and I posed the question, where are these players coming from? Where are these people coming from? Like, honestly, who is playing this game? How is it still growing as fast as it is? Who is buying all these copies? Well, I took a look, and I found that they are coming from one of the biggest video gaming markets in the world. You guessed it, China. Here are some stats tweeted out by Steam Spy, showing the player growth in that region. I also want to shout out to the Infection podcast, who covered this in their last episode and made me aware of these numbers. China alone is what's sustaining PUBG's historic growth, and right now, Chinese players account for nearly half of PUBG's player base. Since June, China's grip on PUBG has grown from about 12.5% to 42% of the player base. Korea, in turn, has shown an uptick as well, coming in at about 7%. And this doesn't seem like a lot, but you compare this to the US, which sits at 10%. This graph really made me realize how insignificant the US is in player numbers, compared to some of the Asian countries. This graph is even slightly out of date, having been posted a few weeks back on October 9th, so I wouldn't be surprised if China now comprises over 50% of total players. And this is the perfect segue into what I want to talk about this episode. Last Hot Drop, number 5, I referenced the growth of the Asian player base and directly associated it with the number of recent cheaters I've seen in the game. I mentioned the competitiveness of certain Asian cultures and drew the conclusion that this is a reason Asian players are more likely to cheat. These things I really have no experience with. These are opinions that I was repeating because I had heard them said by people on the internet, opinions that are not backed up by any type of data. Saying these things was irresponsible of me. I'm not some scientist, professor, or expert, and I don't want to be. No one should be spreading information that they can't back up with hard data, especially someone like me who has extremely limited first-hand experience with Asian cultures. So then I thought I would do a little bit of research. I started trying to find data to see if there was any kind of correlation between nationality and the likelihood of cheating. And then I fell down a rabbit hole of anecdotal evidence. It's really hard to find data on cheaters per country because, well, why would game devs announce how many cheaters they have and where they're from? So in my hour or so of Google, I concluded that cheaters come from literally every country on the globe. As recently as this month, Epic Games announced that they are suing 2 individuals over Fortnite cheats. The lawsuit was filed in South Carolina, and one of the defendants is from Canada. This article led me to another, which said in April, Blizzard won a lawsuit against a German-based cheatmaker. In 2016, South Korea started criminalizing the breaking of a game's terms of service in order to deter hacking. Japan also does this. And here is VAC ban data for CSGO. These are bans made by Valve's own anti-cheat system that shows that out of all CSGO players, USA is the number one in terms of most players banned. If you look side by side at the number of cheaters banned from a given country versus the number of players in that region, it's almost a perfect match. And I think this is where we see the Chinese hacker confirmation bias. My conclusion is that it's not about any specific region. It's about the ratio of players to the total number of players playing the game in that region. So if you assume that, say, 15% of the total population of a game is cheating, and 50% of all players come from a given region, whether it's USA, Russia, China, South America, anywhere, then yes, you can say that based on mathematical probability, you will be more likely to come across a cheater who is from that region. And also, as a game's population increases, so do the number of hackers. It's simply about player population distribution, regardless of nationality, or, like I made in my broad generalizing statement, culture. There could, in fact, be a connection between a certain culture and the increased likelihood of that culture cheating, but without data to back it up, it's just an opinion. I would love for someone to do a study on it. I've been playing games for a long-ass time, and in the past, I've come across a lot of cheaters. I thought back to my time playing Counter-Strike, H1Z1, and other online games, and started to draw a conclusion based also on the opinions that I was reading on the internet that Asians were more likely to cheat. But how do you even know where the people you suspect of cheating are from? How do you know they aren't posing as someone else? And how do you know they aren't trolls feeding into the stereotype? The fact is that most cheaters never gloat in-game. They never seem to speak, so you have to identify them only by their usernames. I remember some games where someone I suspected of cheating had Chinese or Korean characters in their names. And do I remember those instances more than some other hacker named something generic or a name I see every day like Steve? Of course I do. But it's another form of bias. For example, if you think back, you're not going to remember the 20 games you had that were cheater-free. You'll just remember the one you had where you were so frustrated and wanted to rage quit because some guy was spin-botting around the map and instantly one-tapping you. As for my PUBG experience, I play an average of about 2 to 3 nights a week, and for about 3 hours or so each night, and I hadn't seen a single obvious hacker up until about 2 weeks ago. Since then, I've encountered hackers in about 4 different games. You can find articles all over the internet that support any theory you want. You can find anecdotal evidence, and it always seems to target players from Asia. Asia has one of the biggest markets for gaming, just based on sheer population, which is what I think contributes to these type of statements. But it's not correct or responsible to draw a connection between an entire culture and a likelihood to cheat without scientific data backing that statement up, so I apologize for that. So my clickbait title was just that. PUBG is not dead, but I think if Bluehole doesn't implement some very powerful anti-cheat measures into the game, they will see player counts decreasing. This is because the stakes in PUBG are high. I can join a CSGO public server, see a cheater, and just leave. But it's so more frustrating in PUBG because you might have just played for about 30 minutes, finally making it to the top 10 only to be faced with someone who is running at the speed of a motorcycle. Cheaters were the reason I left H1Z1 Just Survive. They were the reason I stopped playing as much CSGO, and they might be a reason I play less PUBG, but we're not to that point yet. But I could see a future where we start going down that path. So now what? I've just spent this entire episode bitching about hackers, so what can Bluehole do? What are some ideas to solve this problem? I have a few. The first is a better reporting system. You'll remember in the August monthly patch that they released the new reporting button, the report a player button that's available in the UI after you die. The problem with this, and this is something that recently came to my attention because I don't read very well, apparently, is that this button doesn't actually do anything. There is a little paragraph that says, "Please note, all reports are collected for the purpose of statistically analyzing incidents that occur within the game. Without further evidence to support your claim, your reports alone will not result in suspensions and bans for the reported players. Also, you will not receive feedback for your reports." So this button does nothing. This button is a way for them to just gather data. But if you really want to report someone, you have to go to their forums, create a video, edit the video, upload the video, make compelling evidence, submit the video, and hope that they see it before they actually act on it. I've seen some people say that it takes 3 to 4 weeks for Bluehole to see the ban submission and then act on it and actually ban that person. So if the person is legitimately hacking, they could continue doing so for about a month until they're actually banned. Now, I don't have solid evidence of these numbers, and I don't exactly know if there is a correlation between the number of reports about a certain player and whether or not it gets looked at a little bit sooner. And there is something to be said about making the reporting process difficult, because there are people out there who will submit reports for every single person that killed them, and there would be a lot of incorrect or unfair reports. So I get it. I get there's a little bit of a trade-off here. You want to make sure that people are correctly using the reporting feature. But doing all of those steps and uploading a video is just too much to ask of someone. Make this report button a little bit easier to use and make it actually do something. That's the first step. They need to make this more like CSGO, where if you get enough reports, your footage of your game will be submitted to Overwatch, not the video game Overwatch, will be submitted to people who review the footage and then make a decision of whether or not you should be banned. This is something they could easily implement into the UI. You go in just like Counter-Strike, you see you have cases pending review, and you go in and you then review the footage and decide if that person is deserving of a ban or not. If enough people say yes, they are cheating, then that person is banned for a certain amount of time, depending on whatever the offense is. This works in Counter-Strike, but only if people actively engage in the Overwatch process and take it seriously. I think it's a decent idea to at least test it out in PUBG, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's just that right now, if you have a button in a UI that has fine print and doesn't actually do anything, that's misleading to me, and it's something they need to flesh out a little better. Second are region and ping locks, and these just make a lot of sense to me, and I'm not a networking admin, so maybe there's something wrong with it, but it seems pretty obvious to have the people in those regions play only against other people in their same region. It just makes sense. This isn't necessarily an anti-cheat method. This is just a way to make the gameplay experience smoother and just better overall for all players involved. I should not be able to go over to an Asian server and play with 300 ping. It doesn't make sense, so why do they allow it? There are some definite negatives to region locks. If you have friends overseas, for example, you wouldn't be able to necessarily play with them because they would be locked to only being able to play in their region. Whereas with a ping lock, you might have a good enough ping to be able to meet at a server that's sort of the halfway point. So I think a ping lock makes more sense than a region lock, but still they need to do something. Going up against someone with 300 and 400 ping is not enjoyable, because pretty much everything in PUBG is client-side. This means that the game appears smooth for the person with 300 ping, but for the enemy, you're jumping around like crazy. It does not make for a very enjoyable game experience. Another option to combat cheaters are bans by hardware ID. This is something that I've seen brought up time and time again on gaming forums, but I'm not actually sure if people really do this. Essentially, it means that when you are creating an account for a game, it's linking up with the hardware identification numbers on your physical pieces of hardware that make up your computer. This means that if you are banned, the ban is linked to an account that is linked to a hardware identification number, which means that you cannot play that game on that computer again, even if you did buy another account. It makes a lot of sense in theory, but in practice, I'm honestly not sure. A potential negative to this method that I can think of right off the bat would be, what if someone else got banned and then decided they were going to upgrade their computer and sell their parts on eBay? I buy those parts, put them into my computer, and suddenly I can't play my favorite game because those pieces of hardware are banned based on their identification numbers. I'm sure there are more downsides to this, but this is one that I can think of right off the bat. So I don't really know the feasibility of it. It sounds really great on paper, and if it's something that they could implement, that would be wonderful, because you don't want to have to deal with cheaters who just cheat, get banned, buy another account, rinse and repeat. It would just be really nice if you ban a cheater once, they're gone forever. And maybe this is the answer for that. I'm not sure, but it's just an option that I've heard come up in the past that might be of use to Bluehole. One other potential anti-cheat method was brought to light by Reddit's favorite streamer, Shroud. He suggested never putting PUBG on sale. Let's have a listen.
Like 30 copies of Battlegrounds already ready to go.
I mean, that's what they do in Counter-Strike. I wouldn't be surprised if they have that here in PUBG. So for those that don't know, Counter-Strike cheating is huge, right? Counter-Strike's player base is pretty much 30% cheaters, right? Okay, maybe not 30, but a lot of it's cheaters. But Counter-Strike's like copies owned. Now that is like 30% cheaters because people buy because the game is so cheap, right? Especially when it goes on sale. People buy like hundreds of copies, and then they just cheat on every single one of them, you know? So if this, I really hope Bluehole never puts this game on sale. I really hope they never do like a Christmas sale, PUBG half off, because you're asking for it, bro. That's when the cheaters and the cheating websites, they buy thousands upon thousands of copies, and they just give it out to cheaters. People who buy their cheats also get a copy of the game to cheat with, you know? Like, shit like that. So I really hope they never put this game on sale. I wish this game would cost more. Like, here's what I hope. You know how Ark did that thing where where Ark was cheap, and then it launched, and then it got, like, the money went up, it was like $30 more? I hope when PUBG releases, whenever their full release is, whenever they think it's ready, I hope it goes from $30 to $60. I really hope that happens.
God damn, what a beautiful voice. But he's got a point, a very good point, and actually sort of confirmed my suspicions about the Counter-Strike community. If PUBG does go on sale, you will see this happening, no doubt. We already see that PUBG is more popular than Counter-Strike has ever been, so I imagine this problem will be many times worse for PUBG. Cost of entry does dissuade people from hacking, no doubt about that. And I agree with him that a $60 game title will turn some people off from deciding to hack or not. Even if it turns off just a couple people, that's a win. One less hacker in exchange for more money for Bluehole to make their game better? Yeah, I'm fine with that. In the meantime, I just hope that Bluehole continues what they're doing. They're doing a great job so far. Hackers are coming in and they're trying to keep up with them. And overall, I can't really fault them. I have faith that more anti-cheat improvements are coming. We just have to be patient and wait it out. This is not a problem that's solved overnight. If you've made it this far in this episode, you probably think that cheaters are this massive problem and they're ruining the game and you should basically throw your computer in the garbage. That's not true. I wanted to talk about this now. It's not a huge issue yet, but I'm seeing glimmers that it might be, and that's something to keep an eye on. Moving on. If you read through the biggest PUBG subreddit, you'd think that this game was dead. If you read through some of the top posts for the past month or so, you'd think that this game was a completely broken hacker fest that the devs have abandoned. And when you read some of these threads with thousands of upvotes, it really feels like these people are the majority of the player base, and that the majority of the player base feels that the game is in a bad state. But let's look at some numbers to see if those on Reddit really are the majority, or if they're just a very vocal minority. There are 333,125 subscribers in the PU Battlegrounds subreddit. This is the biggest subreddit for PUBG. Let's compare that to the total copies sold for PUBG, which very recently has been announced at 17 million. Some quick math shows us that Reddit users in that subreddit comprise 1.96% of PUBG's player base. There's obviously some overlap since one person could have bought multiple copies, but still, that's interesting. So what about active users? When I checked this, there were 6,374 active users logged in on that subreddit, and there are about 1,068,684 current players on PUBG at the time of checking. So if you compare the currently active users on that sub, 6,374, to the number of players currently playing, 1,068,684, the percent of people currently playing versus those active on the subreddit, active versus active, it's 0.6%. Surprise, PUBG ain't dead, folks. Reddit is the extremely vocal minority, very, very small minority, and it's surprising that PlayerUnknown and the team give them the time of day sometimes. It's so hard for me to keep reading through posts there because of the extreme circle jerk around how the game is going down the tubes. I don't think hackers have completely ruined PUBG. I don't think the devs are being silent about the state of the game. In fact, I think they are being incredibly transparent, some of the best communication I've ever seen from any early access game. And I don't think PUBG is a failure or in an unplayable state. If it was, there wouldn't be 1 million people currently playing. There is no button called Optimize that will magically make this game run better. There is no way to instantly ban all cheaters. Things take time. If you're a lurker on that, or any subreddit for that matter, my advice is just take everything you read with a grain of salt. And if you post, be mindful that you aren't agreeing with someone just to follow the trend. People love jumping on a bandwagon, those that are negative and positive, and I'm guilty of it myself. But I urge everyone to make their own decisions about the game after you play it and after you read news directly from the devs. This is not me sticking up for the devs or saying that everything you read on Reddit isn't true. There are some really good discussions on there. This is just me asking you to form your own opinions after you read the facts. Dissing the game without providing any ideas or solutions to your problem doesn't help anyone and is not constructive in any way. That being said, there is a certain formula that many early access games that I've watched tend to follow in regards to how things go down on Reddit and in other vocal communities. And what I see sort of goes like this. Step 1, get a great concept and hype it. Step 2, release it as an early access title. Step 3, get people to start playing. This is the golden era of the game, the time where everyone forgets all the terrible bugs, and down the road they look back at this time as if the game was the best it has ever been. Players only remember the great times they had learning this new game with their friends. Everyone yearns for this stage as the development goes on, and some games even bring back old content from this stage in an attempt to appease the people. Like H1Z1, who just announced they are bringing back an old map that people seem to forget they hated and waited half a year for it to be replaced. Next we have Step 4, where the game begins building in popularity, but it's still pretty good. People start reminiscing about how great life was in the good old days of Step 3 because devs, they're adding new mechanics that the people, quote, didn't ask for. The game starts becoming more feature-rich because, well, games are in early access for a reason, to be built. But with that, more bugs keep popping up, which is to be expected because, oh yeah, the point of early access is to build and test the game. But nearly everyone forgets that little detail. Step 5, more people tell their friends about the game and the player counts go up. Everyone's having a grand old time. And then the hackers roll in. Which brings us to Step 6, meltdown. Here comes the salt. The community turns to shit when hackers start appearing because they think that the devs have gone silent. But they've gone silent for a reason. It's because they're doing one of two things, in my experience. The game devs either don't know how to stop the hackers, so they ignore them and let them run rampant, while saying they are continuously working on anti-cheat, H1Z1, or they devote all their time to stopping them, which in turn causes fewer new features to be released for a few months. Either way, the inevitable community meltdown happens where everyone becomes toxic and turns against each other. People are labeled apologists if they stick up for the game. People forget practically overnight that up until this point there was constant updates and communication from the devs, and of course, the community bitches about the fact they paid to be a beta tester. Which brings us to Step 7. The turnaround. This is the rare and elusive step that I would say 90% of early access games never achieve. They are able to right their ship, get ahead of the cheaters, and press forward to full release. I fully expect PUBG to power through and have a successful launch. But this is where we see many, many games before it fail. But right now we are sitting right around Step 5. As the player counts grow, so do the number of cheaters. This is just a fact of life like I explained earlier in the podcast. Lately, the number of threads on Reddit complaining about hackers has gone through the roof. It is so hard lately to browse that sub now that the Circle Jerk has honed in on this is the best, worst game ever made. Yes, PUBG has problems, but nowhere that I can remember has Bluehole ever gone back on their word as far as the development schedule. We do remember the fiasco with skins, of course. They have been extremely open about current progress and what's to come. They've needed to delay some things, sure, but nothing has ever been promised that I recall that hasn't eventually been delivered within a reasonable amount of time. I'm talking about bug fixes and features. And speaking of time, development takes a lot of time, so people need to be patient. If they manage to hit their 1.0 release on Xbox by the end of the year with vaulting and the new map implemented, I will be very impressed. Right now, it does seem like a tough ask, because we haven't seen much tangible progress. But that doesn't mean progress isn't being made. People have to have realistic expectations, and I see too many people demanding huge features with a deadline of yesterday. There seems to be this distortion of time on the internet, where people have such short attention spans that they perceive 2 days as being a week. Some people seem to forget we've had steady and timely releases lately, even though the changes have been minimal. Bluehole hasn't abandoned the game, and I'm pretty positive they are doing a lot behind the scenes that we haven't even seen or heard of yet. And it's unrealistic to expect a new vehicle, new weapon, and a slew of new features and bug fixes every week. It's got a long way to go in terms of optimization and cheat detection. I'm not denying that. But if we give it some time, I bet that PUBG will be a completely different game in about 3 to 4 months. So yeah, right now, if you went on Reddit, you'd think the majority of people hate this game, that the community as a whole is dissatisfied with the state of the game and the lack of change. But that is simply not true. The percentage of vocal opinions on Reddit is minuscule, 2% or less, compared to the number of people playing the game. It's okay to be critical. I understand that constructive criticism is helpful and it does make the game better, but being negative just for the sake of internet points accomplishes nothing. Overall, this game is just as fun as the day it came out. If you haven't heard, vaulting is coming soon. We have some massive test server updates on the way as well, and it's getting me even more excited about what's to come. I'm not going to let a few hackers ruin my day. So that's about it for me. Check back in about a week or so, and I'll have another episode ready to go. Topics will include the recent updates, as well as what's about to hit the test server. Until then, I'll see you in game.